Hey guys, what's going on? Rick here with episode 10 of Cage Side Convos.
What up? This is Quince.
So this week we're going to talk about Stoicism, which, for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, is a kind of an old world philosophy started in Greek culture. So yeah, that's as much as we need to get into detail of what it is right now. Where the conversation started with Quince and I was probably about a month ago. I've got a buddy of mine who always shares podcasts with me, something he finds interesting. He sends it my way. Hey man, check this out. And so probably 6-7 weeks ago, he sent me one on Stoicism, which kind of fell to the back of my mind. I didn't really think about it. And then a couple weeks later, he's like, "Oh, hey man, did you end up listening to that yet?" So I was like, "Oh shit, I forgot." So I ended up listening to it, and it really caught my attention. So when I came in that Tuesday morning after I listened to it, I ended up saying something to you, Quince. It was like, "Oh man, I listened to this podcast on Stoicism." And the first thing you said to me, just like you couldn't even wait to tell me how excited you were about it. You're like, "Man, I just started reading the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius," and you mentioned that you were kind of doing. Essentially, it was like the 30-day kind of Marcus Aurelius challenge.
Right.
I'll let you introduce that the same way you did to me.
Sure. So, and first of all, that Tuesday morning, I love synchronicities like that.
Yeah.
We just happen to come across the same concepts, working toward, very, very similar goals.
Right.
And the Meditations book and the philosophy of Stoicism was something I had ventured into before, years ago.
Right.
This is back when I was heavily reading all sorts of philosophies, religions, things like that, just to learn more. I wanted to surround myself with higher-minded ideas and thought processes and people. And I found that Stoicism was more of a practical philosophy. So I guess something that you could put into direct use every day. It was not, it wasn't too wordy. You know what I mean? It didn't stem from, a long history of things I knew nothing about. It spoke in very direct language, and it was something that from kings and emperors to slaves and to common people were able to use.
Right.
So it was something that spoke right to me, and what I really liked about it was the fact that it seemed to create that framework, you know what I mean, that almost created that fertile soil from which things could grow from.
Okay.
And of course, I'm talking about, me, and
right.
self-practice and self-mastery. It dealt a lot with, self-discipline. And yes, and letting go of control and having good and productive practices to add to your life. So this was something that I read before, and just recently, it popped back in my head that I wanted to revisit it. So I went to the library. I was looking up on YouTube, looking it all up. Went to the library.
Show off. You went to the library.
Went to the library. I paid all my overdue fines, so they let me start taking out books again. But I got the Meditations book, and I had been reading it, and it was crazy how much everything had aligned with just the sort of things that we talk about on a regular basis here on the show, and just in general. And so to walk in, I brought it with me because after class I was just going to read it a little bit with my free time, and you brought it up. I'm like, meant to be. Meant to be. So, I don't remember where we just left off about that, but. I was already getting into, they've got, you can look up on the internet and find anything. And I came across the 30-day challenge that was inspired by Marcus. I can't say his last name for shit.
I'm going to flex on that. Aurelius.
Marcus Aurelius.
And the only reason I can do that is because I listen to like 80 YouTube videos. So the Aurelius challenge.
Yeah, the Aurelius challenge. Sure. And what it did is it broke down Stoicism into, or at least his philosophy of it, into six topics. The first one being the mind of a sage, which is basically is telling you to seek out people who you think are either have accomplished things that you have wanted to accomplish in your life, or that you hold to a higher standard. You know, people, role models, if you will. You know, I think the term, you know, what would Jesus do, or what would Jay-Z do, or however, you know, is kind of, you know, a reflection of that same ideal. So, mind of a sage being number one, you know, ask yourself when you come into a situation, what would so-and-so do in this situation? Because what that's going to do is that's going to help you look at the situation objectively. So that means outside of your, you know, first-person perspective. And objectifying the situation is actually topic number two. And I'm just going to go through these quick because we have, you know, a little bit to touch on.
Sure.
But so after the practice of objectivity, he said that meditation and quieting and focusing the mind is paramount. And I believe that. And it's not just Stoicism that says that. There's a lot of Eastern philosophy as well, Buddhism that gets into that. And a lot of these ideas and philosophies and even religions cross paths quite a bit.
Yes.
Amazingly so. Exercise, keeping a journal, and also recapping your day. So, you know, it's all of these things that I was trying to do for 30 days every single day.
Right.
Like I said, to create that framework for me.
Real quick, Logan Yancey just kind of chimed in. One, Logan, appreciate you listening while you're out there, brother, and kind of nodding to us that we should do a podcast if we aren't already. Basically, that's, you know, kind of the framework we're setting right now through doing this. Hopefully, being able to recapture this audio and reproduce it on an actual podcast forum. So if that's something you guys are more interested in, if it's a little bit easier to listen to on that front, we do have everything available on YouTube, so it's a little bit easier to plug into the car and listen to as you're just kind of driving around. And hopefully soon we will be releasing some more of our stuff on more, I guess, traditional podcast forums. So yeah, appreciate you weighing in, brother. Which I hope that means that you would be interested into listening to us instead of just tuning in to see Quince's handsome mug on Facebook Live, right? But yeah, appreciate that, brother. And now we'll make a seamless transition back to what we were just talking about.
Sure, seamless.
So so essentially, kind of, I think each person that we study, that I studied anyways, which, I mean, there's only a finite number of people to study on Stoicism because they're all pretty much dead now.
Yep.
But you see a lot of these topics recurring, a lot of these concepts popping back up, you know. So the first tenet of the Aurelius challenge that you talked about was...
the first tenet of it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was mind of a sage.
Mind of a sage,
Yes.
right? And so as you broke that down, kind of, you talked about surrounding yourself with like-minded people.
Right.
And you see that a couple of the other people that even in the past month, exposing myself to Stoicism and reading, so I read the meditations book you gave me. Like I said, I caught some YouTube like breakdowns and recaps, and a lot of them are so like Epictetus and Seneca and those guys. Everybody has they're like these 10 steps of Stoicism, or these 8 steps of Stoicism, and these are and basically on bullet points of their philosophy. But as you dive into each bullet point, it gets very deep and very expansive. So kind of like the mind of the sage, when you look at Aurelius is like 6 tenets, right? You see that. So Marcus Aurelius was the culmination of Stoic philosophy. He was kind of like the last one, the philosopher king, right? Where he was, you know, the emperor and the ruler, and he was also a philosopher. You know, he studied and stuff his whole growing up, and he studied Epictetus, and he studied Seneca, and he studied Socrates and Plato and stuff like that, and kind of culminated everything. So anything that Aurelius says, you usually see it. Well, I guess he's echoing those before him. So, you know, it stands to reason that surrounding yourself with like-minded people is a common concept through through all the years, and also something that you and I have talked about quite a bit. We've seen in our personal lives the impact that it has, and the way it challenges you too, when you have someone who has a like-minded goal, and if they're approaching their goals in one manner and you're approaching your goals in an alternative manner, and you can sit, you can compare process, right? You compare your concepts and stuff, and that leads into this notion of being willing to change, being willing to be wrong, and accepting that, and so we can either teach somebody or we can learn from somebody, and that again, you're the most efficient way I think to accomplish that is to be with people who have the same goals in mind.
Sure.
Because if I'm hanging out with somebody whose primary goal is to just make money and to be rich and have that kind of rock star lifestyle, that differentiates heavily from my pathway, and I'm not going to put a lot of stock into what they have to say.
Right.
But if I meet someone who shares kind of the same idea of what purpose is and stuff, I'm definitely more inclined to listen.
Yep. And there's the word right there. I think that's the term that we're looking for. Because all these people that as our circles get smaller as we move forward, we find, or at least I find, that the people in my smaller circle, now we might not all have the same purpose, but we all have purpose. We all have individual purpose that we are working towards. And I think, that working towards and the process of working towards are where we find these commonalities.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I think the purpose is individual, but the process is universal.
Right, and so that another thing that the Stoics talk about very heavily is acting in accordance with your nature, right? Which to me resonated, and I defined it in my mind as purpose, right? So act in accordance with your nature, and especially Aurelius being. But what I found interesting about his perspective is that he was in a position of power. And so he had this constant struggle of balancing his idea of what was just and good and right and enacting that, and always with the social betterment in mind, right? He talked a lot about the nature of men is to treat men kindly, right? Or to care for all men. So, and everything that he did, he always put a heavy emphasis on doing what was in the social good and the greater good. And so that was his purpose, right? And I think, like you said, the universal purpose, everybody has a different actual purpose, but I think universally, when you talk to someone about their purpose, if someone defines it as purpose, it typically goes back to that notion of helping others. I know you and I have talked a lot about that in our free time, off camera and stuff. But trying to use the forms that we have in front of us, whether it be martial arts or whether it be music or whether it be just social interactions and stuff, but finding like-minded people and helping them to define their purpose. So it seems kind of reciprocal. My purpose is to help others find their purpose, which might be to help others find their purpose. But it's everybody's purpose is going to be defined by their own nature,
right?
And everybody's inner nature and everybody's inner inclinations and stuff are going to be slightly different, but the commonality is that we're all kind of looking for a way to serve, kind of help each other and serve the kind of greater good and stuff, and however that manifests for us.
Like you were saying, I think before we turned this on, you were kind of breaking down where the term Stoicism or Stoic or Stoa came from,
right?
And you said it was something about the gathering in the marketplace of Stoa, or
right? Yeah. So Stoa is the Greek word for. I'm sure everybody's seen it. I'm going to see if I can describe this well, but you see basically like an awning with pillars in front of it, just kind of like an open air place, right? And that's where they could stay, do their marketplace, or where a lot of common gatherings and social gatherings and stuff happen, right? And so what differentiated kind of Stoicism in the early stages from more like classic philosophies of the time of the Socratic philosophies or the Cynic philosophies and stuff like that, where those all happened in primarily educational centers. So you had to go to a school, right, to learn from this. But the Stoics would gather in open places, in the Stoa, right? So in these open air places, in these common places, and they would have conversations with everybody, and everybody would be involved. So when you touch on that notion of how relatable Stoicism was, it stemmed from that engagement, and everybody needs their own philosophy, or to help with feeling lost and stuff like that. So the intentionality of it was, even from the sounds of it from the very beginning, was to include everybody, and was to help everybody kind of define and understand their own nature and how to act upon it and react to it. build from it.
Right. So, it comes as no surprise that the totality of that is a uplifting of, not only self, but, community.
Yes.
And those around you.
Right. Absolutely. And I like one of the quotes from the meditations was, those who embrace their nature will toil endlessly to perfect it. So once you kind of define that purpose and you understand what your nature inclines you to do, and you find that you run out of excuses, you find out that you run out of reasons not to, and not even that, but you have more of an inner drive to perfect that and to continue to work towards it, and whether it be just having conversations or helping others understand, or meditating or journaling, or whatever you're doing for your own self-betterment, in the mindset that eventually you'll be able to use that to help others.
Yeah. And I've always felt this way when it came to, as far as realizing a purpose or defining a self-purpose, everything that came after that, whether they were jobs, maybe not jobs I saw myself at, maybe they were those dead-end, type of positions where it wasn't going to be forever, but it served a purpose. It was an ends to a means, and it's not like I enjoyed the work. It could have been in retail or landscaping or food or what, in sales. Like, none of these things were things I wanted to do, but having that purpose in which I was working towards, getting bills paid, paying for my free time so I could still work at this purpose, work at music, work at business. I learned to enjoy. I enjoyed going to work because I knew exactly what I was working toward.
Right.
So that's always how I was able to define that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Which was very helpful.
And that, kind of understanding how to appreciate that which is in front of you. Another one of the quotes from the meditations was, wherever a man can live, he can live well. Right. So no matter what's going on in front of you, no matter the opportunities you have, no matter the troubles or the toils that life puts in front of you, no matter where you're at, you can live well if you understand how to approach it correctly. Kind of the nothing is evil that the universe wills, right? So whatever's put in front of you, whatever's thrown your way, whatever jobs you have to take at the time, it's neither good nor bad. It's just what has to be done.
Right.
And understanding how to look at it through a more objective lens. And that's so the word stoic, like now, modern day, the word stoic means basically just like stone face and nothing bothers you.
Yeah.
But I think that's kind of far from the actual Stoic philosophy, wherein they talk a lot about the Stoics teach you to understand and feel these ways, right? Like when you go to work, it's in your nature to be upset that you have to go work this shitty job.
Yeah.
But you can't control that. Like you can't control the way you feel about it, but you can control the way you perceive that and the way you act upon that. So for you, going to a dead-end job, retail or whatever, especially retail, man, I from what I understand, it's one of the most unforgiving, unfulfilling jobs there is.
Just repetition and repetition, man.
Yeah, but when you take the mindset, so you feel that it's shitty, you feel that you don't want to be there, and that's fine. It's perfectly acceptable, and it's good and natural to feel that way and to process it, but you act according to logic. Right?
Yeah,
and according to your, like you said, your ends and means. So you have that purpose, so you go and you make the conscious decision, because that's what you can control. And that's so it's not that you're stoic and you're stone faced, you don't give a shit about anything because you're tougher than that. It's that you're stoic in your mind. It's that you've made the determination that you know what is just and good and right, and what compels you to continue forward.
Right, because you don't stop being human. You know what I mean? Being a Stoic or of this philosophy doesn't mean you stop being human.
Right.
But it is in part being able to objectively look at the situation for what it is and not how you feel about it, as we humans feel, but looking at it for what it is and trying to make the better decision, better next step forward than we would whether we're just emotionally based.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Yep. And I love the mentality that the constant mentality that you see is encouraged to be developed is just that, is that one of logic, and is one of doing the best that you can at every single opportunity that you can, and understanding what is in your control and what's not, and only acting in ways that you can control.
Right.
You know, and the metaphor that you see brought up a lot and you hear talked a lot about is the one of the archer. And it's one of my favorite metaphors that I heard. One of the favorite things that I picked up from it was when an archer fires his arrow, that's it. That's the end of it, what's in his control. So whether or not he hits his mark is irrelevant. All that matters is everything that happens up until the time that he releases that arrow, right? So did you practice? Did you take your time to train and practice your archery? You know, did you get the best equipment that's available to you? You know, did you pick a good bow? Did you take care of your equipment? Did you pick a good arrow? Did you make sure it was straight and true before you drew your bow? All of these things, all of the preparation, all of the practice, all of the time before that is in your control. So then once you release the arrow, nothing else matters. Right? Because they talk about specifically, what if it's a live target? So what if you're at war and you shoot an arrow and your enemy moves? That wasn't in your control. Right. You couldn't control that. You know, you had no way of knowing. What if a big updraft of wind comes up and knocks your arrow off? Right? What if a lightning bolt strikes? What if some crazy shit happens? Right? You have no control over that. But what you do have control over is how you prepared. So again, going back to the dead end job and stuff like that, you have control over showing up. You have control over putting effort into your job. You have control over your mindset about what you can accomplish at the job, right? You don't have control over the customers that come in. You don't have control over your boss. You don't have control over your managers. You don't have control over the weather. You don't have control over people's attitudes. You have control over how you go in, how you act, and how you react to certain situations. Sure. And that metaphor resounds very prominently when it comes to martial arts and competition specifically. And we always say you either win or you learn, right? As long as you try your hardest, that's all that matters, you know. And I very adamantly and firmly believe that. As long as I know that I came to training every day, as long as I know that I put in as much effort as I could every single day, as long as I know that I ate well and I was hydrated, as long as I know that I listened to my coaches and I put in 100% effort while I was there, I don't care if I win or lose, because I don't have control over my opponent. Right? Even in jiu-jitsu, where the mindset is controlling your opponent, right? You have to control yourself first, right? You don't have any control ultimately over what your opponent does, over how they react, right? So as long as you prepare correctly and as long as you perform as best you know how, the result doesn't matter, right? So through this, I think we can learn to hinge our idea of success based on what's in our control, you know? So it's not results-based, it's process-based. It's preparation-based, you know? Right. You can only, you know, again, to kind of beat a dead horse, you can only control what you can control, you know, and understanding the difference. Yeah. So that dichotomy of control is how they phrase it too, is understanding and learning the difference and then putting stock in that difference. Yeah. And not saying, well, this is out of my control, I wish I could control it, you know? Yeah.
It's a mentality based on continual forward progress. Because you're never left dwelling too long in failure, and you're never left, I don't want to use dwelling again, but I'm sure there's another word for it, but like sitting in your success and soaking that up for too long, you know, because there's always that forward movement that is pulling you, you know, win or lose.
Right. And I think it, you know, kind of that ties into another mentality. So is Epictetus, who was he started as a slave and was freed, and then he started diving into Stoic philosophy and really cultivating it. And he was one of kind of the originators of it, you know, which again kind of speaks to the universality of the Stoic philosophy. So you have a guy who was a slave, in Epictetus, and became a free man and started studying philosophy. You have Marcus Aurelius, who was an emperor, you know, philosopher, you know, philosopher king, right? So he was at the top end of it. Seneca, who's kind of in the middle, he was a senator, but very wealthy and very powerful man, you know. So you have kind of this vast array of influential and profitable, you know.
But also, and not to interrupt you for too long, but some positions were given, you know what I mean? Right. And some you were born into all of these different positions, maybe without a choice to that. Yeah. But since that is out of your control, that's not something.
Right.
Oh, my bad, y'all. That's not something that was stop them.
Hey,
or
that's
kept
not,
them
that's not something that was in your control.
That's not in my
You just
control
gotta, You just
either,
got to keep going. One of the metaphors I hear a lot is, when we speak on people who were born into wealth and stuff, is you were born on third thinking you hit a triple.
Right.
But I think the Stoic philosophy really encourages us to understand, again, that's not in our control.
Mm-hmm.
It's not in our control where we were born. Right? It's not in our control if we're a son or a daughter, It's not in our control if we were born in America, if we were born in a third world country. It's not in our control, if we were born to rich parents or poor parents, or
right.
what circumstances we were born into, We have to accept that that's out of our control. And so we don't react according to that. We react according to what we personally feel is the just and the right way to act.
Right.
Sometimes it takes a long time to understand that.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't hinge our idea of success based on things that are out of our control, right? So again, this notion of the outcome is not in our control. The outcome of our actions is not in our control.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we shoot the arrow, and what happens from there is not in our control.
Sure.
So we were already successful because we did everything we could before we fired that arrow. Whether it hits the bullseye or whether it completely misses, right? It's irrelevant. That's not the success of the process, And so we have to establish our worth internally. And again, one of the quotes you hear is, don't sell your will cheaply.
Mm-hmm.
So don't sell yourself cheaply, right?
Right.
Establish your own worth and make sure you hold yourself accountable to that established level of worth, and
Yep.
be around people that value you at that worth.
Yes. Yes.
So don't cheapen yourself to appease others, because you don't have control over other people's opinions of you.
Right.
And their idea of success doesn't match yours.
Right.
And you don't have any idea or any control over whether or not they perceive you as successful.
Mm-hmm.
And it's tiresome and it's worthless to try to appease other people and try to let them influence us to that level,
Sure. I definitely think that brings inner turmoil, no matter what that facade that you put on the outside is. I think, you really need to count on yourself first and to find your own value.
Right.
It's just in the long run, and as far as, that peace of mind and that happiness,
Right.
No one really can give you that.
Right.
Right. People searching for happiness, and don't get me wrong, people define it differently. People define it in money, or material things, or their social circle, and there are no right or wrong answers necessarily.
Right.
But you won't ever know that until you define what it is for you that's going to work.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And a lot of what you see is when people define happiness externally, is they don't ever seem content.
Mm-hmm.
They don't ever truly seem happy, because there's always more to be had.
Mm-hmm.
There's always more to be gained. This notion of retire into yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right? Of being able to be quiet and be calm and be happy with what you have and be happy with what you can provide yourself. If you define happiness and success externally, when you retire into yourself, there's nothing there. You're vapid. That's just, you're dead inside, basically. So until you develop that inner worth and that comfort and contentment with who you are inside, right? Nothing externally is really going to satisfy that.
Yeah, and and I think, and this more so a personal opinion, but when we have that emptiness, when we have yet to define ourselves and hold a certain value, that void, I think, oftentimes will get filled with things like habitual things, like addiction, or what's it called, like just those neuroses, neuroticism. You know what I think, or you know what I mean? Like, for example, I would have a very bad habit of always picking up my phone and checking social media, always thinking I need to be on top of things, and it's just that urge to check. But that's me not taking the time to put a value on my time,
Right.
on my individual focus and awareness. And I noticed that it's not something that I actually need to always do, need to always hop on and check and be on top of. That really my mind is just kind of running wild. So, you know, we were talking a little bit before about awareness and meditation and things like that. And like, I use meditation to try and break those habits that aren't necessarily doing me any good in the long run. So before you start filling, you know, your time with whatever social media or drinking or drugs or food or, you know, just other things that might not be beneficial to you in the long run, I think having that self-value and being able to center yourself and be okay just within yourself and just be okay just being is important. And I think a lot of those ideas of coping mechanisms aren't something that are generally talked about.
Right.
You know?
It kind of, you know, just avoidance.
Avoidance, yeah.
You know? Yeah, and
Sure.
that's, I mean, basically, so you see this a lot with drug addiction, social media addiction, gaming addiction, just ways to disconnect, just different ways to disconnect from yourself, really, because these are all ways that we fill our downtime.
Mm-hmm.
And when we don't have a sense of purpose, or we don't have a sense of self, or we don't have a sense of self-worth,
Mm-hmm.
it's easy to cling to these avoidances.
That's huge.
These distractions, these disconnections, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one thing, I know you mentioned kind of in that 30-day challenge, one of the things that it tasked you to do was reflect on your day, right? So it led to journaling, essentially. Fill us in a little bit more on that, and if you would kind of explain what that did, if anything. You know, I guess I'm asking the question is, what did that do for you to put you more in touch with yourself and to encourage that idea of retiring into yourself?
Sure. So journaling on the day, recapping the day, there's a lot that goes on in the day. I mean, you can imagine how many thoughts go through the mind, you know, in a day. How many interactions, conversations, emotions, instances, you know, there's a lot that happens in a day, especially a full day. And there's far too much of it that just kind of goes, you know, once you go to bed that night, that it's gone. And you never, you know, you don't think about it again. But I noticed that when I sit down at night, and this is usually right before I go to bed, just recap the day. Things that had come to mind, maybe successes or failures or new connections or things like that. Recapping this, keeping it fresh in the mind, being able to sit and kind of meditate on it and look to the future and see, hey, how does this work in my future? How does this help me be better for tomorrow? Or how is this not, you know, how is this taking me out of my path? It's almost like self-talk, but it's writing it down on paper physically. So you have the physical action of it, which connects to the mind and to memory. But also you have something in which you can read the next day or even, you know, a week down the line.
Sure.
So it makes me more consistent, first and foremost, in my actions, in my motivation. It keeps things to memory, whether it's people's names or whether it's individual intention.
Sure.
And for me, you know, it's also just it's a creative process. It's another creative process. So it helps me in the bigger picture, just as being a creator, being a writer, as well as, and I like these little things. I like finding the self-discipline in all of these little tools and actions, because self-discipline, you know, that's like just going in and lifting weights. I mean, it's a muscle. And the more that you use it, the easier it gets all around as far as using that self-discipline. And I think, you know, those are just some of the biggest things that have stood out to me so far.
Sure. I think what's interesting, something that, you know, kind of our conversation this morning preparing for this was how much you see these ideas recreated in different in modern philosophies. You know, one thing. So in studying kind of what it what it takes to be successful. One of the things they talk about is consistency, and they talk about owning the morning and owning the night.
Mm-hmm.
So developing that habit and stuff. So, you look back 2,000, 2,500 years,
Mm-hmm.
and these guys are saying the same thing. Like recapping the day, essentially, is kind of owning your nighttime.
Right.
Like having that pre-bedtime ritual where you recap.
Yeah.
You kind of externalize things, which I think is healthy. Sometimes.
Yes.
But you develop a consistency. So you develop a consistency in physical patterns and habits. So actually writing the stuff down. But I think you said you develop, consistency in mental patterns too, because I think when you say something out loud, it makes it more real. And you understand if, okay, this was an asinine thing that I said or thought or felt.
Mm-hmm.
And then I mean, it's got to, I would imagine, really help you understand what's in your control and what's not. Like,
Sure.
Especially if you write down, well, so-and-so did such and such and I got pissed off.
Mm-hmm.
And then I did this.
Right.
And you can examine it, and you examine it in an objective way. Like, these are the facts of what happened.
Yeah, huge. You know, because imagine writing something down that night when you are pissed off,
Right.
and reading it the next morning when you're not pissed off.
Right.
And now you have two different options there, two
Right.
different ways in which you can go,
Right.
to rectify that problem.
Right.
And it could just save you a lot of strife.
Yeah.
Money, time, legal fee. You know what I mean. It saves you from your impulsive self.
Yeah.
Saves you from your impulsive self. And I don't want to go too much further on the recapping the day without. I think I forgot to mention the fact that part of that recapping the day is also writing your next day, writing the plans for your next day. Whether it's just that morning, I think I stick with the morning for the most part. Writing my morning down so I know exactly what I'm gonna do, and I've got that consistent regimen that I could fall into that helps me become more productive for the day. So it's writing my day prior and recapping my day previous. So I think that's kind of all one and together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, so a pattern that I've developed for myself that I feel like has set me up for more successful days, I guess kind of my really kind of bare bones version of what you're doing is when I get home at the end of the day, I unpack my gym bag, put everything where it goes. I put my lunchbox away, I put my dishes away, I do all this stuff, and then I pack my stuff for the next day. And what I found is that doing all this at night, I feel I'm more clear-headed and more alert and aware when I get home, and I can figure out, okay, these are the classes I'm doing tomorrow. These are the things I'm going to need. Make sure I have enough clothes, enough equipment and stuff planned for the day. I make sure all my food's ready in the fridge. So in the morning when I get up and I'm groggy, I already have, kind of like you're doing, the first couple of steps of your day planned out. So you don't have, you wake up and you're automatically being productive. You're automatically on a roll.
Yep.
Again, you own the night, you own the morning. And that's, as much as we like to say we came upon this on our own, and in our own right we developed this out of whatever influences we had, the necessities that we found in it, and the benefits we saw in it. But then you turn around and you look and you see that these guys are already doing it. These role models that we can find, or these people we can look to with the experience, have already been doing this. And it's pretty encouraging sometimes to know.
Well, what a feeling to come across something, whether it was a moment of enlightenment that you come across yourself or find through connecting with other people, to find that these ideas and these concepts are like eternal and universal. There's not a better feeling in the world than that, as far as what really helps you trust in the process. It's all these sort of things that really that help validate and help push forward and strengthen conviction. Sure. Because this is, what are we talking? 2000? No. 2000.
Yeah,
easily.
Than that? Yeah, easily too. So
wow.
Aurelius was what mid first century, so the year 100 to
Sure,
200-ish
sure.
was his kind of reign, and I mean all these guys are before him,
Right.
so well over 2,000 years ago.
And he wasn't even, and so the meditations book you're reading, he wasn't even writing a book. Those were just his daily journals to
Yes,
himself, which is
yes,
crazy.
yes.
But it could be read and learned from in that
Right.
in that way.
Well, and I think one thing I love to talk about the definition of meditation. Anytime I talk about meditation, I like to define that and kind of dive into that because there's a very Eastern heavy influence on meditation. I think we've talked about this before.
Yep.
Is where everybody thinks meditation, they think completely quiet, you're just sitting at home and incense is burning and stuff like that. Which yes, that's one form of meditation. And the way I like to use the term meditation is for focused thought. So if I'm going to meditate on an issue, say I want to meditate on human nature, and I'll just sit and I'll think, and that's how I meditate, right? But meditation can also just be free-flowing thought. So like when you recap the day, or again, the meditations of Marcus Aurelius, it was just him thinking and writing it down on paper. Right. So that's also a form of meditation, and meditation can be so diverse. But I think what makes it meditation is I think there's kind of a healing power in it, or a power of self-betterment as you meditate and you sit and you think and you retire into yourself and you explore what your thoughts are on this and let your mind kind of work, and however it manifests, whether it manifests in journaling or just mental clarity at the end,
Sure.
better sleep, whatever.
Sure.
So I think meditation, doesn't necessarily just have to sit and be. So again, I think the Eastern philosophy kind of gravitates towards an absence of thought, finding that inner peace by like clearing your mind of empty thought and stuff like that. But I think the kind of more of a Western and more of a Stoic meditation definition is that more free-flowing thought and embracing what you think and holding yourself accountable for your thoughts and stuff too.
Yeah. No, very much true. And we had talked about this before, because I for the most part I use the more Eastern terminology of it.
Sure.
Where I am just being aware of the mind.
Yeah.
So it's beneficial because it's another practice in self-discipline. You get to see that the mind is gonna kind of do what the mind does.
Yeah.
It's gonna ideas are gonna spark, both good or bad. They're gonna run past your mind, and it's nothing that you have to let take over your whole thought process. You realize from an objective point of view, this is just kind of how the mind is gonna work. And so it's when a thought crosses, you let it pass, and you just bring your attention back to the center. And so in that sense, it is strengthening for me focus and awareness, which helps me out. Especially being an artist or a performer.
Yeah.
It's going to help my memory. It's going to help me stay in control in the moment.
Yes.
So these are the type of things that I look for and that I need, but certainly to use it as the welcomeness of these thoughts, or to focus on certain ideas and concepts. I mean,
Right.
there's not too much you can't do with it.
Right. Absolutely.
Even scientifically, and I mean, you can't quote me, but I'm sure you can look it up. Even scientifically, they say meditation and the silent time within yourself strengthens gray matter within the mind.
Sure.
And it helps strengthens these connections that we make with our thoughts. Focused thought helps strengthen the neuron synaptic connections of thought.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
He said, yeah, sure. Yeah.
No, it's there.
I'll find out. I'll put a link underneath.
Synaptic connections, Webster Merriam-Webster definition. So that was an accurate definition, the way I understand it.
Sure.
I think kind of as you were talking about, the mind does what the mind does.
Right.
Right. So a lot of the Stoics talk about not being passionate, which when I first started reading the term, I put my own spin on the word passionate, and I thought, man, like I can't believe that I've been living wrongly, because I'm passionate. I feel very passionate about what I want to do and what I want to provide the world, through day one and through my time coaching and stuff like that. I feel very passionate about wanting to help people. And I was like, they're saying that passion is wrong, that passion is wrong. And then the more I read it, and the more I understood the context in which they were writing it, the way that the Stoics use the word passion is more reacting in an emotional framework, right? So like you said, the mind's gonna do what the mind's gonna do, and so I call them knee-jerk reactions.
Right.
The way your emotional response to something, and when somebody makes you mad, right? And when you're meditating, I think you can kind of understand, okay, this is an emotional response, this is a knee-jerk response, or this is a passionate response.
Right.
So not acting passionately is not necessarily not being convicted to something or not feeling strongly about something. It's more reacting in an illogical way is kind of how more I understand the word passion through the Stoic kind of definition of it. Which I think is important to understand, because if you react in fury, if you react in sadness, if you react in angst or anxiety or depression, or if you react in any emotional state, a lot of times that's what leads us to a regretful action.
Sure.
And through meditation, I think we can better define what these things are. And so you can almost kind of do a mini meditation when you're in the moment. When somebody punches you in the face, you're like, all right, I'm gonna meditate on that for about half a second before I haul off and I counterattack, you know. One of is, oh man, I can't remember which one to attribute it to, but it was either Epictetus or the Seneca one I was listening to, but essentially that in order to be harmed, you must believe that you've been harmed. In order to be harmed, you must believe that you've been harmed. So in that, if somebody, whether somebody physically strikes you, or somebody talks shit, or somebody does something dirty behind your back, right? In order to be harmed, you have to believe that you were harmed, right? So you have to believe that what that person did is going to negatively affect who you are as a person, right? And I think that's the biggest thing to understand is, yes, okay, that you broke my nose. Yes, okay, I can't make my car payment this month because you stole money from me. Yes, okay, whatever you did have a negative effect on me, but it doesn't have to affect who I am inside. And that's all I can control is who I am internally, right? We don't define ourselves by external successes like we said before. So that Stoic mindset of, in order to be harmed, you have to believe that you've been harmed.
Right.
What did this physical assault do to my character inside?
Right.
What did a robbery or someone talking poorly about us behind our back, what did that do to my ability to be a just and good person on the inside? A lot of times the answer is absolutely nothing.
Yeah, not a thing.
There's very little externally that can ever happen that is going to change who you are as a person, or have the power to change who you are as a person.
Yeah.
And understanding it in that light gives you a very real power over your disposition, over how passionately you respond to something, how emotionally you respond to things, because you don't have to.
Yeah.
You know?
I think it might have been Seneca when he was talking about practicing hardships.
Yeah.
Purposely practicing and putting yourself in position where you know it's going to be difficult.
Right.
Because to go through some of the things you're talking about, sometimes it's easier said than done.
Yes.
So when you put yourself in a position where you know that animosity is going to come your way, whether it's verbal or physical or what have you, the practiced I don't want to say stance, but how you endure such situations is something that you can practice and build on and strengthen, like a lot of the other things that we've talked about here.
Yeah.
But it's that, that practice is certainly needed.
Yes.
Certainly needed. And that's why he did it to himself, because he knows that the world is going to do that to him as well.
Right. And I mean, man, that's, again, where I develop most of my philosophy is on the mats, is through martial arts. And that's a very tangible way to put ourselves through hardship and put ourselves through trials and stuff, so you learn how to deal with them.
Right.
And if the more you practice it, the more prepared you are for when it happens in the real world. And a derivation, I think, that I again, so shockingly, is founded in Stoicism, but this notion that with practice we can adjust our knee-jerk reactions. Right. So the Stoics discuss how it's within human nature to feel a certain way, and your emotions are natural, and you can't control that. Correct. You cannot control your initial response to something, right? But with time and with practice, I think that you can slowly cultivate what that reaction is, and through things like, go ahead.
I was just going to say your individual reaction to your response, natural response. Yes.
Right. And so you say, okay, I know that when this person does this thing to me, my initial response is going to be anger. Right. So I accept that, and I can get through it more quickly. Right. Mm-hmm. So that knee-jerk reaction, that emotional response becomes a bit more fleeting, but it takes practice and it takes effort. It does. It takes being exposed to those situations constantly.
Yeah, we were. I think even the last time we got together, well, the one prior to the interview with Jason, we were talking about the benefits of conflict, and that oftentimes conflict came from the impulses of the amygdala, which is that reptilian mind, or what they call in Eastern philosophy the monkey mind, the mind that's just going to spark off. Sure. So that's kind of what we're battling. We're battling generation upon generation of this mind that sparks off whenever it wants, and then of course it does that because it kept us alive back in the day,
right?
In the jungles or in the water or wherever. But now we are blessed with, parts of the mind that deal more so with logic and reasoning, and these are the things that we are practicing. These are what we're applying to both nature now and in the future. We're at 51. Keep it.
Sure. No, let's one real quick. Rich, thank you for the shout out, brother. Thank you for tuning in. Always appreciate your insight and your ear there, Rich. What we're gonna do, guys, is I think we're gonna wrap it up right there for today. We have a lot more to talk about, so we're actually gonna split this up into a 2-part episode. So if you have anything to add, please chime in with a comment, throw us a link, tune in for the discussion. And next week we have, I may be halfway through my notes. And this, again, is just kind of really, really scraping the top. Exploring Stoicism and studying it a little bit has really been exciting and enlightening for me. Real quick, let's see, Logan, what you got there for us. Oh boy. Something a good friend of yours once said: the initial reaction you have to external stimulus. I'm gonna have to get back to you on the rest of that right now. There you go. Thank you, Quince.
I got the touch.
The initial reaction you have to external stimuli is almost always emotional. However, when you pause and take the time to think about feeling of yours and then respond, that response is almost always logical. Yes, absolutely, and that's a perfect kind of synopsis of really what the Stoic mindset kind of encourages. Sure. You take a second, breathe, you let the emotion flush through you, and I think it's important to honor your emotions and to honor your feeling, because you're not wrong for feeling that way. Right. What happens next is right or wrong, and that's your definition of right or wrong. Awesome, guys. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in today. Like I said, we're going to be back next week. We're going to try to pick up right where we left off here today and kind of go through some more of the stuff. It's been absolutely fascinating studying it and really seeing how much of what we talk about ultimately stems from it. So next week.
It's encouraging.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure.
And I do want to just say congrats to you. Episode number 10, we're in the double digits. I don't know if it seems like a bunch to you guys, but certainly starting from nothing and not really knowing where we're going to take these episodes. It really, it's a blast. It's been a blast. Absolutely. Very enlightening.
Yeah.
So thank you guys always for tuning in.
All right, talk to you soon, guys.